Well, hello, it's Miss Gina. If you listen real close, you can hear the rain on my metal roof. Still coming down. It's pouring. So, we're on chapter 9 of the Mysterious Shrinking House. So, you're back at story time at Miss Gina's Planet. And so, when life gives you lemons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them to be exact, make lemon cake. Lemonade just makes you thirsty. Just saying. We're on chapter 9, so let's get back to it. No! Samantha's voice was flat and firm as she admonished the oldsters. You raised me, and I love you all, and up to now, I've gone along with whatever you all said. But now I think that was wrong. Oh no, not the loving, the going along. Why, you should never have given up. And if Mrs. Bright and Mindy have to stay, let's not pretend they want to, or that it's right. Nurse Morrissey roused herself, and a faint flush spread over her puffy cheeks. Oh, if only. Why, I'd be willing to get seasick swaying down that ladder if there was a real chance. Fudge, I'd jump if you had a nice big cushion for me to land on. The others stirred, remembering each one a different and long-forgotten delight, a place, a season, a favorite food, if only. Do you know, said Mrs. Britomart shyly, as if it were a wicked wish, I would like to see a motion picture. The professor's television is too hard on my old eyes, too full of lines. And it growls so. I saw a motion picture once. Robert Herron and Mae Marsh in The Victim. It was so very thrilling. Hey now, I remember that. Mr. Goff beamed. It was at the Elysian Picture House over to Mosstown. With chapter 7 of that serial, Runaway June, wasn't it? Always wondered what happened to poor little June. He lapsed back into his melancholy. The Reverend sighed in pious horror at such worldliness. But if the truth was told, he too felt the stirring of lost delight. He remembered the brief spell during his seminary years when he had supported himself by teaching school. He had been miserable in the job, utterly unsuited for it. But still he remembered the shining children. Clean and dirty, trusting and defiant, they had all been so shining and alive, like candles in the sunshine. He felt a pang as he looked at Mindy and saw the same eager impatience. I suppose we have to let the light go out, he said sadly. Well, said Mindy confidently, we can fix that. For a start, we ought to figure out how to get ourselves unshrunk. Dear me, you make it sound so simple. Mrs. Bright teased between sips of coffee. However, she went on, setting her cup down. I suppose it is just as well to begin with the obvious. Where does Professor Kurtz keep the fatal machine? In a shed outside the back door, Mr. Doppel answered, reaching down a book from the crowded bookshelves and sketching a precise little plan of the museum on a fly leaf with a stubbly pencil. The arrangement was a simple one. Here's his little drawing he did. there's the floor plan he drew. It says bath, bedroom, shed. Ah, you're only wasting their time, Gus, Mr. Goff wheezed. We've been through all that years ago, Mrs. Bright. It's a monstrous big machine, big as an icebox, and knobs and wires all over. I like to electrocute myself just trying to flip the on switch on the generator. I bet even the professor don't rightly understand what all them gizmos do. Why, I bet old Prof just flung it all together and came up the reducer purely by happenstance. The young prof works on it like it was Chinese puzzle. We hear him out there banging and cussing near every blessed morning. Okay, Mindy was undaunted. If we can't work it ourselves, at least we know how to work it on houses. We could get somebody to make him do it. What's to stop one of us from going out to find a policeman? They're going to find a policeman. How are they going to get his attention? They're like 5 inches tall. I don't think he'll hear them. Miss Britomart gasped. Oh, promise me you won't do something so rash. Were you safely to pass the cats next door and reach the corner, you could not cross the street. The wind from passing motor cars is like a hurricane. When we first came to Lake Meander, I set out in the desperation for a constable and was very nearly blown down a storm drain. I can scarcely think of it without growing faint. And the motor cars drive everywhere so much faster nowadays. She blushed a little, remembering. Mr. Goff saved me. The other gentleman tied a rope about his waist, and he swung down from the curb to pull me free of the grating. I have never forgotten that, Mr. Goff. Mr. Goff's nose purpled. He's embarrassed. Pshaw, he said. I'd do it again, too, Miss Britt. But they'd never get the rope around me. Everything, it seemed, had been tried. Every suggestion from Mrs. Bright or Mindy brought a reminiscence. Do you remember? Do you recall that nice young man who visited the museum so often in 1930? Samantha went out one day and spoke to him, and he never came back. He fled, said Samantha. I think our voices must sound like if he took me from a skinny, dressed-up mouse or a wind-up toy. Yeah, I think it would sound like they were a wind-up toy. And I've always wondered if he took me for a skinny, dressed-up mouse or a wind-up toy, or it was, no, he tried that in 1932. I think our voices must sound like chipmunk chatter to big folk. No, we tried that in 1932, or was it 33? Apparently, the only plan left untried was that of sending an explanatory letter to the authorities. But though the professor kept notepaper in one of the cupboards under the showcase by the front window, he never wrote letters, and so there were neither envelopes nor stamps. There's neither one. We don't have any. And said Mr. Doppel sadly, the authorities would no doubt dismiss it as an amusing practical joke, quite understandably. Glumly, Mindy agreed. I suppose like the Chinese fortune cookie fortune that says, help! I'm a prisoner in a Chinese cookie factory. She had begun to be a little discouraged and was not much cheered by Mrs. Bright's homey observation that any knot fingers could tie fingers could untie. I only wish I could let Daddy and Mama know I was here and okay. The tiniest of quavers trembled in her voice. Mrs. Bright was thoughtful. Mr. Doppel, do you have a map? Just how far are we from Brittlesdale? I should imagine we were driving for 4 or 5 hours last night. Augustus Doppel reached down a much-thumbed pocket atlas. Mosstown was shown on the Pennsylvania map, but Brittlesdale and Doppel had been too small for inclusion. Mr. Doppel penciled them in. But that can't be even 100 miles. Let me see. Mindy craned to look. Boy, he must have come by way of every back road in 2 counties, huh? Almost as if we were an answer. A dull, uneven roar from somewhere outside vibrated the room. Mindy and Mrs. Bright jumped up in alarm, but the oldest scarcely blinked. The television, Samantha grinned. The prof has the morning news with his porridge and coffee. But it sounds so weird. It sounds weird. Got a couple more pages. Maybe 4. Maybe it's a little more than a few. A few is 3. The single bell rang twice, then once, then 3 times in a row. Come along, honey, and see for yourself. Samantha drew Mindy after her into the hall, explaining as they made their way through the dark labyrinth of hallways and out onto the street. That tricky little ring on the bells, that's Mr. Crump's signal to me that there's something worth seeing on the television machine. I usually watch from the Umstadt's attic. That's the brick house across on Grace Street next to your Mrs. Bright's house. There's a little window up top set just right for it. My box seat, I call it. They hurried along High Street and down Grace. As they went, Mindy puzzled over the deep, drawling voice that floated overhead. It was like an imitation of a voice. No, it was like a voice on a record. Or the radio when the dial was turned all the way down to bass. Oh, here's another map. Shows Brittlesdale. Can you find it? Let's see. Brittlesdale is over here. Over here. A little drawing of a map. So let's see where we're at. Samantha drew Mindy after her into the hall, explaining as they made their way through the dark labyrinth of hallways. Oh, that's not where we are. They hurried along High Street and down Grace. As they went, Mindy puzzled over the deep, drawling voice that floated overhead. It was like an imitation of a voice. No, it was like a voice on a record or the radio when the dial was turned all the way down to bass. Now we're caught up. Is that because our ears are so little now? She asked, explaining her thought to Samantha. Sounds reasonable. Samantha nodded. What did you say was opposite of bass? Treble? Was it treble? Well, like I said a bit ago, I always figured we must sound treble, or would, if anybody ever heard us. Sort of like mice and chipmunks used to sound when I was little. I mean, when I was big. She laughed ruefully. In the Umstadt's attic, 2 old mattresses of blue and white, ticking, filled with straw, had been placed against one wall. Mindy found that she could recline very comfortably, and through the gable window across the low dark room, see straight into the professor's living, eating, sleeping room. The television occupied the place of honor on his littered table between the greasy hot plate and a stack of unwashed plates, pots, and cutlery. I think cutlery's like silverware. Ravuni Betoscope, growled the syrupy lady in the commercial. Mindy wriggled down into the almost flat position and wrinkled her nose and scrunched up her eyes in an effort to sort out what the heavy vibrating words could mean. Then the familiar face of the Channel 6 newscaster loomed beside the steaming coffee pot. "And now," he said, "more about last night's mad collector." Samantha leaned over that Mindy signed that she had understood. Out of sight, behind the door, the professor's coffee cup rattled in its saucer. Swinging his slippered feet off the bed, he leaned over to hold the cup over the floor while he poured the spilled coffee back into it from the saucer. The newscaster was trying to balance his expression between amusement and concern. The damage in that explosion in Brittlesdale, which leveled Mr. John Hallam's barn, was limited to the barn itself. But in addition to the rare and valuable old dollhouse, of which no trace was found in the wreckage, we now learn from Officer Edward Beagle of Brittlesdale that the suspected dollhouse thief may have been surprised at his labors by Mrs. William Bright, a neighbor, young Mindy Hallam, owner of the dollhouse, and Horace, the Hallam's Great Dane. All have been missing since yesterday evening. Horse? Mindy was puzzled. I think that maybe the dog's not there with them. And it is now feared there may be a connection between the theft and the disappearance. Police are on the lookout for a blue-paneled television repair truck and a suspect using the name L.L. Putt. If you have seen this, Wilhelm Kurtz clattered his cup down on the table and switched off the announcer on the middle of a word. The old lady and the kitty, they couldn't have been. The worn slippers flapped across the floor, and a rumpled vision in purple and yellow striped pajamas filled the doorway. The professor scuffed across the near end of the waist-high table and learned. He didn't learn anything. He still did the same stuff. He leaned over to fix a bleary eye on the open bedrooms. And that's a real word in this book. I didn't make that one up. And kitchens of the Buckle House. Gone was yesterday's dapper look. The face that dipped past the upper Uppenstadt windows was a mass of finely webbed wrinkles. The flesh under his eyes was puffy, and the black hair looked pasted on. Perhaps it was. Mindy thought, faintly surprised. Couldn't have been, the professor repeated. Suddenly he straightened, sucking in a deep breath. I wonder if he coughs when he breathes too. And then spitting out the words, "Mrs. William Bright." Didn't Uncles Mary Buckle marry a Bright? That's a tongue twister. Samantha pulled Mindy after her into a dark corner of the attic. "You and Mrs. B didn't move anything upstairs, did you?" The question seemed to shape itself inside Mindy's ear. It was so soft, a whisper. "You didn't leave anything lying around that could give you away." No, I don't think so. Anyhow, there was stuff on the floor all over the house, and we didn't have anything with us, only our clothes. The beds, did you sleep in one of the beds? I spread it up and put the nighties under the pillow. Oh, what's he doing now? Can't see. He's over on the front door side. Come along. We'd better take cover. They tiptoed to the stairwell and down. As they slipped along the upstairs hall, the slapping footsteps could be heard moving away, and a moment later, hurrying back, breathless, Samantha and Mindy reached the ground floor and the cupboard beneath the stairs. Once safely inside, Samantha lit a candle, a hidey-hole in every house. She said, across the top of the door, holes had been drilled for ventilation, and tucked inside the roomy cupboard were a small easy chair, a low cot, an orange crate bookshelf with books, and a supply of short, stumpy candles. We might make them ourselves. We make them ourselves. Samantha set the flickering candle in a saucer. Ever since we used up the last of the candles and lamp oil in the emporium, the prof doesn't miss the occasional candle end. Mindy winced at the noises and loud grumbling that came to them from next door. Golly, I hope he doesn't notice how the drapes in the dining room are pinned together. Oh, Samantha, do we have to stay shut up in here? Samantha was torn. She had been brought up to take cover at the least sign of danger, and if to hear that had seemed sometimes cowardly, it was after all a question of surviving. The professor was very large and very spiteful. Mindy bounced impatiently on the cot. How can we know what to do if we don't watch to see what he knows? Samantha agreed to leave the hidey-hole, and they watched from the unstopped parlor. The professor, having forced a window in the buckled dining room, lifted the drapes with a finger and peered in. He missed seeing that the brocade was pinned together, for something else caught his eye. With a long pair of tweezers, he reached in and brought out a curious collection of articles, which he lined up on the painted front lawn. A kitchen candlestick, a book in a green cover, and 2 plates. Cash with a cellophane candy wrapper crumpled in the middle. Uh-oh. That's not sounding good, is it? It's not sounding good at all. And there we are on chapter 10. So next time we'll be on chapter 10. And the ants go marching 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah. The ants go marching 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah. We'll be on 10 next time. And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. When we come back again, we'll be on chapter 10. All right. I hope you like that book and my silly nonsense. So grow your brains and increase your minds. And I want you to read more in 2024. I want you to read things that make you excited. I think if you don't like reading, you probably just haven't found the right book for you. Sometimes we like specific things, so just keep trying out new books and see if you find something you really like. So, as always, I'll see some of you tomorrow, and I'll see some of you next time. So, bye-bye.